people threatening to hurt themselves, even though they don't want to hurt themselves, but what they're trying to do is to say to their loved ones, it's this serious. I'm willing to hurt myself to help you understand it's this serious. So please tell me if you have a solution to this that you maybe haven't told me before, because I need that help right now. I think that we get into these places where we're so scared and we're so desperate for help and we're so desperate for understanding and validation. I think just somebody believing us can help our symptoms a smidge.
Hi, I'm Dr. Josef Witt-Doerring. It is my pleasure to be joined again by Chris Page, one of our regulars on the channel. He's constantly invited back for his own personal experience with protracted withdrawal, but also ongoing recognition and leadership in the space for being someone who's great to go to for help with this issue. And so, Chris, thanks for coming back on again and sharing your thoughts with us.
Always such a pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah. So the theme of today's talk is going to be on surviving protracted withdrawal symptoms. And so, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you because, I know in my practice, I get asked all the time, like, what do you just do during the day? Like, how do you get through like one single day with these symptoms? They can be so bad. And so I was wondering if you could share your wisdom and what you learned through personal experience and also professionally working with hundreds to thousands of these people now, of how you get through a day with protracted withdrawal, akathisia, these types of symptoms. So start wherever you'd like to. Maybe you want to unpack what those symptoms are so people have some context, and then you could talk about what you went through and how you dealt with it.
Sure. Well, I think that this is, a common theme of people who are struggling is how do I get through the day? How do I somehow, distract myself or come up with some way to kill time, to occupy myself? And I think that's an incredibly challenging thing for a lot of us. I think anybody that's, in any kind of a severe acute situation knows that moment to moment can be a struggle and a fight. But I think for me, it became, well, first off, let me just kind of quickly describe the symptoms I had. Everybody knows I had akathisia, but I think people assume for some reason that I just had akathisia. I had just about every withdrawal symptom that I've ever seen listed, ranging from severe depersonalization and derealization, where the world didn't look the same to me. It felt like I was looking through gauze, almost like it looked hazy and distant, but it wasn't so much that I was hallucinating. It was more that I could see things that I recognized, but I couldn't feel them. And because I couldn't feel them, I couldn't recognize them in the sense that they didn't feel familiar to me or they didn't resonate with me in the way that they always had. I felt completely disconnected from my soul. I felt that, people ask me, what did you feel most days? And I said, really, all I felt most days was being tortured, being in just the most agonizing state of restlessness and agitation and fear and overwhelm and easily scared and easily, sensitive to noise, sensitive to light, sensitive to anything touching me. I couldn't wear socks when I was pacing as much as I could because even socks felt restrictive at that point. All kinds of physical symptoms. I had severe pain. I had like interstitial cystitis and urogenital pain and prostatitis. Prostatitis so severe that I had my prostate removed in the middle of this, and they discovered cancer retrospectively when they biopsied my prostate. But the pain was so severe that I'd convinced the doctor just to remove my prostate just to see if that would give me any relief. And I have to say, for anybody that's had akathisia, there's nothing like pacing with a catheter. I can say that's not something I would highly recommend to the general public. But So I was, and that's another thing with prostatitis, ironically. Prostatitis has an interesting kind of commonality with benzo withdrawal or psych drug withdrawal in general, which is prostatitis is this weird kind of situation where men are being gaslit and being said that's in their head because doctors can't figure out what's wrong. And there's actually a subculture of men ending their lives because of prostatitis. It's really a sad kind of parallel experience to a lot of things that people are experiencing from psych drug withdrawal. But other symptoms, inner vibrations, constant sense of doom. And I was paranoid. I was frantic. I was yelling all the time. I was self-harming. I was hitting myself. So I was just a complete mess. And because of that, in many ways, I was human repellent. My entire social support system had kind of given up on me. So, I ended up in some very difficult situations trying to survive. And it's how then did I manage these days? Because my days would often start at 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, as I'd be like jolted out of bed when I woke up to start pacing and frantically moving. In some ways, what I would do is there would be certain things throughout the day, like the sound of a school bell or the sound of something throughout the day that would give me some time to kind of create small little hurdles to get through. So 8:30 is this school bell, 9 o'clock is this school bell. All right, I've gotten through 30 minutes. I think I've said before, counting as I'm walking. Honestly, I was so actively suicidal for a long period of time. I would rotate between ways I could harm myself. I'd go sit on the side of a bridge for a while. I would go drive very fast for a while. Unfortunately, I had access to a gun at that point, so I was with a gun a lot of the time. I wouldn't say those are productive ways to get through the day, but unfortunately, those were ways that I did get through the day when it was as severe as it was.
Chris, what stopped you from using the gun or tipping off the bridge?
I think I think I've said this before in other interviews. I most of the time the average, even though the average was going like this, was 50.1% that I wanted to live. If you look at traditional psychological views of suicide, I had no reason to live. I had no purpose because I had lost everything. I couldn't function. I couldn't work. I lost every possession I had. I lost all the social support. So I had no reason from a connection base to live. So I think for me, it came down to a couple things. I think I've mentioned this before, is I'm stubborn. And I'm lucky too, honestly. I mean, I had a gun in my mouth way too many times with my hand like this on the hammer, and it could have easily, or on the trigger, and it could have easily gone off many times, and it didn't. So I think in a spiritual sense, I was spared because it was my job to come back and help other people somehow navigate this. But I think what it was too is that deep down inside, I believed somehow, even though I had no reason to believe it, that I could somehow, if I strung enough days together, I could somehow survive this. I could somehow.
Chris, did you just know that kind of in your heart of hearts, or was it something that was informed by, I don't know, going online, talking to other people who had gone through this, who told you that you would recover? Like, how did you know that it was going to get better?
Well, I think it was both. I think it was, I had this inherent faith in my, I think I've joked before, I lost faith in God. I lost faith in humanity, but I still had faith in the God of neuroplasticity. And so I somehow believed that even under the dire circumstances from a central nervous system perspective that I found myself in, that somehow if I hung in there long enough that I could get better. And then obviously there were success stories. Back then, it was almost a decade ago. There was nowhere near the content that there is now. But there was, Benzo Buddies had success stories. So I'd read the success stories. And then I'd met a couple people along the line that had gotten better, and that clearly helped too. But I think at the end of the day, it really came down to my own resolve, my own real drawing. I think it's easy to say for any of us that you don't know how strong you are until you have to be. And I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but I think we discover an amazing strength within us as we survive the incredibly challenging situations a lot of people find themselves in.
Let's segue back now to getting through a day with akathisia. Pick up where we left off. You were talking about, walking, thinking about suicide sometimes. How did you get through the 16 hours that you were awake?
I mean, for me, one thing I know a lot of people can't handle is I could handle a shower. It wasn't the same. It was almost torturous in the same that, I wouldn't feel the normal, pleasure and relaxation of the warm water on the back of my neck that it used to bring me. But at least it would sort of distract me a little bit and give me enough time that if I did it 2 or 3 times a day, that would kill an hour. Eating, I would be pacing through the kitchen, taking a bite off a plate, another bite off a plate, back and forth. I would be, I had a couple people, thank God, that I could call. That was a big part of this. I think for people that are going through this, it's one of the most important things to do is to find a couple people that you can, connect with and bond with that can kind of be your withdrawal buddies. I know that's not always easy for everybody, but I think if you can, that's one of the things that really saved my life was, first, a woman named Marcia, who would spend 4 to 6 hours a day on the phone with me, talking me down. I'm like, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. She's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I mean, she really kept me alive. And then Nicole Lamberson after that, who really, kept me alive. I think it was having people that, as I'm frantically screaming, I can't do this. I can't do this, saying to me, yes, you can. Yes, you can. I think that's one of the gifts I try to give my coaching clients is that validation and support and love, really, that you can do this, even when it feels like it's impossible. And so many people that I speak to find themselves in situations that feel impossible. And I understand that. But every day that I look at it almost like serving a jail sentence. Every hour I got through was an hour closer. Every minute I got through was a minute closer. Every day I got through was a day closer. And I was, checking off I had the wall, with chalk, just counting days. I think it was, I think I've spoken about this in other interviews too, it's something called the Stockdale paradox, which is, this dual focus where on one hand, I never lost sight of the belief that somehow I would recover. Even though I had zero evidence to justify that belief. It was a completely faith-based belief, but that I would survive this. And then the other part of it was, how did I manage the day to day? And that was this way. It was, there was a period for the first 8 or 9 months, I was being forced to go to 2 or 3 AA meetings a day sometimes. And I'd be in these meetings just flailing like a fish out of water and just, being told all this messaging that was, honestly very challenging to be told that maybe you haven't hit your bottom yet and you're choosing these symptoms. Things like that were hard. So that was another thing that killed time, was going there. And I did find some nice people, but it wasn't really the appropriate place for where I was at that point.
I talked to Dan Landauer, and he said the same thing. I mean, he came at it from, he had his protracted withdrawal injury coming off Xanax used, I guess not as prescribed, getting it not from a doctor. And that's kind of, he said pretty similar things, just like you. He said he walked a lot. He said he talked to people on the phone, and he just went to a couple AA meetings a week just for the structure of it. Now, some of the messaging may have been more relevant coming from an addiction framework for him, but it was just like doing things. I've got patients right now who just go to church just cause. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was like I was forced basically, because if I didn't go, my family was going to kick me out, even though they ended up kicking me out regardless, But, for me, it was just, how could I, kill any time? Because I mean, I was able to drive some, even though it was like, again, like, oh my God, I probably shouldn't have been driving, but, it was doing that. It was walking. I mean, it was so hard to walk outside though, because I had this terror and this visceral, just, fear of everything that if I got outside, I felt like a turtle without its shell. And so I would just pace in the house a lot and be, frantically online searching for the magic answer to this. I think everybody's trying to find that magic answer that somehow exists. That, would be a solution to at least give ourselves some, reduction in the intensity. I think for me too, it was, again, thank God, having people to talk to.
So, Chris, if you could design like a perfect schedule for someone who had resources, people to help them, like time on their hands, and severe akathisia, bad protracted withdrawal symptoms, how would you tell them to spend their day?
Well, I think a lot of it's really based on what they need, because I think for me, it's, and I think for a lot of people in withdrawal, we want support, but we don't want support. It's this kind of bizarre in between place where we want people close to us, because a lot of us have monophobia, where we're really, scared and terrified of being alone. But at the same time, we don't want people having expectations of us. So I think a lot of it's educating social support systems. If somebody has all their resources met in the social support system, then it really comes down to endurance. How do I, manage this discomfort? How do I manage this fear? How do I manage, so a lot of it is, for some of my clients, what I'll do with them is because another thing that's very common for somebody who has akathisia or somebody that's stuck in this is they'll repeat the same questions over and over and over and over and over. We become bottomless pits of needing reassurance. And so what I'll do with clients is often have them write down the answers to the 5 most common questions that they ask. So they kind of have like a cheat sheet they can carry with them, so they can at least look down and maybe reference it a little bit. Because another thing for some clients is they'll vacillate between periods of improved reason and then less reason, and improved reason, less reason. So in those periods of improved reason, if they can have resources that they develop then that they can try to implement to the best of their abilities. Because again, everything when you're struggling like this is to the best of your ability. There's no expectation of you really doing this well, just trying if it'll work at all. But again, is to, to remind yourself that you're not going to feel like this every moment. To remind yourself that there might be some fluctuations in your own experience, that if you feel awful right now at a 10, maybe yesterday was a 7. So if you can hold on to that belief that a 7 might be coming in the next hour or the next few hours or even by the next day, that little bit can give you some hope to pull you to that next period of time as you try to just grapple with the fact that, again, I know this is that, I wish I had a remedy to the intensity of this. It's more just the endurance of it. How do we get through it? How do we manage it? How do we not scare ourselves extra? It's already scary enough. I think that's a place where people get stuck to, is reading lots of scary stories that then they perseverate on and get convinced of as if that's going to be their story.
Well, talk to us a little bit about that. How do you reduce the amount of fear that you have going through this?
Well, I think first off, again, appealing as much as we can. When somebody's in a frantic, agitated state, it's hard to appeal to these parts of their brain. But again, to try to find as much ability to grasp onto that reasoned, rational part of our brain that can say, that most people do get better from this, that most people experience profound healing. I believe all people experience some healing. It's the belief that there are hundreds, you even mentioned it before, thousands of people have come before us and have navigated this somehow and recovered. People have recovered from this. The majority of people have recovered from this. How again can I, continue to remind myself that, I have a beautiful, I have a couple clients. I have one client where his wife has done a beautiful job of tracking his, symptom intensity. And I think that can help too. If you can have somebody if you do have social support, have somebody help track it, because sometimes when we get back into a bad day, we forget there was ever a good day. And having practical, she has a graph that basically shows one of my analogies for healing, which is a feather. We get updrafts with the feather, but over time that feather gently starts to float down to the ground. And his graph looks like this. It's going up and down, but the general overall course is a downward trend. So having even things like that, like mnemonic tricks that remind us that, 3 days ago it wasn't this bad. Because I'll have clients say to me, 2 days ago was great. And then 2 minutes later, they'll say, I never get windows. I never have a better day. And it's because when you get back into the intensity of a bad day, it's hard to remember there was ever a good day. Or at least a better day. Not maybe even a good day, but a better than the worst day.
So what are some of the things you have people write down so they can read it when they're having a bad day?
Well, I think, certain things like, maybe this fits in with some common themes that we see with people is, people often are convinced that this is how they have always been. They forget that there was ever a pre-benzo or pre-psych drug version of themselves. Because, again, we have to remember so much of this is being driven by like chemical terror and chemical fear and the inability to think rationally. But it's this, belief that somehow this is the new normal. This is who I am. This is who I, have become in a sense. So then, we'll write down that, some reminders of who they were prior to this. You were a dad, you were this, you were a husband, you were a father, you were, you accomplished this, you did that, things like that, because, that can help kind of almost tether them back in a sense to that prior version of themselves. Another common thing is,
let me ask you, why is that important for people to remember who they were before they got sick? Can you kind of play out some of the psychology that you see?
Yeah, because
maybe for yourself or for your patients. Yeah. Well,
I think for me, I think I've spoken about in other interviews, like future-oriented fantasies of wanting to get back to not only that version of myself in a prior version, but a better version of myself that I can, even achieve more and accomplish more and enjoy life more. Now that I have these things. But, obviously when I'm in the middle of it, I'm not thinking about enjoying life. It's more just this conceptualization that there could be something better out there. But I think, because psych drug withdrawal is such a soul stripping experience for people, it really brings into question who they are. Another thing that will happen too is people will say, if I had this anxiety before and I took this medicine for the anxiety, what's going to happen to that anxiety when I get better? And I'd say to a lot of people that the things you worried about before or were troubled by before will probably seem much less challenging after you've gone through this profound experience that you're going through. But I think it's again, reminding them, because people will get convinced this is who they are. This is who they've become. And then the problem too is we have a social support system that's often reinforcing negative messaging just from their own fear and not understanding what's happening too, which then confuses the person even more. And I think the other thing too is a lot of us that when we get injured become worse versions of ourselves. So if I was a little anxious before, now I'm extremely anxious. If I was a little panicky before, now I'm completely panicky. If I was a little pessimistic before, now I'm completely pessimistic. And that leads also to social support systems saying, see, this is just how you've always been, which then can also kind of reinforce to the person that maybe this is always how I've been. When they know deep inside, when we talk, about things, that this is clearly not who they are or who they've been.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. So knowing who they were in the past and what they could get back to, but also, they're not just getting back to that, but there's growth there potentially as well. And
exactly.
Having
that was
them
one of the
kind of looking forward to something.
I think that's such an important thing is that people, they're so scared, understandably. But if we can get them hoping, and that's what I mean. Anybody that knows me knows that I try to focus always on hope for people. And how do we get them hope that this isn't forever, that this isn't permanent, that they are going to, not only get better, but get back to a life that they want. I mean, that's one of the things I try to do with my clients as they're starting to improve. When they're in an acute crisis and are acute symptoms, this is something that would be irrelevant. But as people start to heal, it's where do we want to go? How do we want our lives to look? I mean, I pledged that the anxiety that led me into this mess in the first place was something I was going to deal with. And that, you had asked before, what's something that really helps with fear? And I'll just briefly mention, if people are interested, reach out to me. But for people that are past an acute phase in withdrawal, I found one of the greatest things that helps with fear is something called the Safe and Sound Protocol. It's just an amazing, listening program that really addresses a fear-based response in our nervous system. And I've seen that help with a lot of people once they've crossed a certain threshold of healing. But I think back again to how do we remind ourselves, it's, what do we need to be reminded of? Who I was, who I am, that I can recover, that people recover from this every day, that I can get better, that, another thing that, I was going to bring up is that people get convinced that they're special, that they're the only one that has a symptom, which I think is a very, understandable fear-based response. But it becomes this kind of thing that people can't comprehend that another human being could possibly endure what they're enduring. And because so much of the symptoms of psych drug withdrawal are subjectively reported, you can't get a blood test or you can't get a measurement of it, then people can kind of agree to disagree that their symptoms are similar. And in the process, I hear very similar stories and people convincing themselves that they're an anomaly, that they're the only one that has this type of inner vibration, or they're the only one that has this constellation of these 4 symptoms. And because they have those 4 specific symptoms in that one constellation, that precludes them from all the healing that everyone else is, has access to or is possible to achieve. And I see that with people, and I think it's a fear-based response. It's that I can't believe anybody else can feel like this. There's nothing that, no doctors really, helping me see that this is the case or that this is possible. And so it must be this weird, unique experience that only I'm experiencing. And because I'm the only one experiencing it, that, again, rules me out from ever getting better. And I think the reality is most people have very common symptoms in this. Most of us have some fear. Most of us have some anxiety and depression. Most of us have some muscle issues. Most of us have some food-related issues or sensitivities. Most of us have light and sound sensitivities. But when people start getting, well, my light sensitivities are from, this part of the color spectrum and his light sensitivities, and that means they're different. So therefore, I'm not going to heal if he's healing. I think we just have to be careful to look for reasons why we're similar versus why we're different. And I think that's what, I see people that get hopeless convincing themselves that they're the only one that has something.
Psychologically, why do you think the brain does that or the mind does that when there's, like, I know one side of it is like, there's just the disbelief that a pain like this could be common to anything else. I know that's like one thing, it's too severe. Is there anything else going on that you think of that makes that gets people so caught on that? Because I see that as well, and you can tell people, hey, this is normal. We see this a lot, but they still kind of grip to it. Is there anything else going on there that, aside from just that disbelief about the level of suffering that can be expected that they should endure?
I think it fits kind of in with another common theme or common dynamic I see, which is people threatening to hurt themselves, even though they don't want to hurt themselves, but what they're trying to do is to say to their loved ones, it's this serious. I'm willing to hurt myself to help you understand it's this serious. So please tell me if you have a solution to this that you maybe haven't told me before, because I need that help right now. I think that we get into these places where we're so scared and we're so desperate for help and we're so desperate for understanding and validation. I think just somebody believing us can help our symptoms a smidge, And I think that we get stuck in these ways of saying, because I think the other thing too is if it's like, it's an experience unlike any other. And if we compare it to another experience that other people understand, then they're going to use that experience to expect us to do things to get better the way that experience would dictate them getting better, in a sense. I see that with people all the time, which is it's the same reason people struggle to ever admit they're getting a little bit better, is because they're afraid their social support system's expectations of them will change. Well, you're feeling a little better, then you should probably be able to start working again, or you should be able to start helping around the house, or things like that. It's a fear of expectations changing, of demands changing. And so I see people, I think that's part of it, which is they'll say to their loved ones, you're not understanding how bad this is. And so if I tell you it's something that will never get better, maybe then you'll fully understand how bad this is. Maybe then, I think we're all hoping that somebody's going to say, hey, I figured out a remedy. Hey, I figured out something that will help. And I think that but it also matches with the intense fear that people have. People are so scared to have hope because they don't want to feel disappointed or let down, that it's scary to even say that, yes, I could get better, especially when they're not feeling like they are getting better.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at all of those things. Yeah, sometimes it is a cry for, I'm barely hanging on. Let me tell you how bad this is, just how doom and gloom the situation is, because just maybe you may find some solution, maybe even if they know there is no solution. Yeah.
Yeah, just please help me.
Yeah. Okay.
But that becomes such an exhausting dynamic for the social support system then, because nobody can sustain being exposed to threats of self-harm all the time. It's just exhausting. And so that's another thing, just in terms of getting through the day. You said about social support, just real quick to piggyback back, is to the best of your ability, giving that social support a break. To the best of your ability, isolating yourself for a little while instead of asking that person the same question 100 times. I know it's not easy, and I know the hope, we need that connection so desperately, but we also need to be as mindful as we can in our out of our mind state to consider that they're human too, and that they have a breaking point, and we need to give them as much sustenance as possible so they can take care of us and love us the way we need.
Yeah. I'm starting to see kind of a framework come together. I know, I want to say this first. In the later stages, once people regain some functioning, the best way to make it through the day is to have as normal of a life as possible, whether that's work, socializing, doing normal things, and just doing that, just rejoining life. But in these severe states, which mostly we've been talking about when people are completely disabled and when it's really bad, we've mentioned, things that you'd want to keep in mind during the day. Walking, if walking helps, talking to other people going through this, making sure that you're mindful that your support system needs some time. So just getting used to spending some time alone. What are some of the other things that you either did or other people did, maybe more like walking, like just these random things they do to distract themselves? I've heard things like people doing puzzles, if they're able to do that. Not everyone can, but maybe you could just shoot off the kind of the distraction type things that your clients are doing when they're in this really severe state, if they're not walking. Yeah.
Well, Nicole, used coloring. She would like just frantically kind of color some, again, walking again. I think it's what exercise can your body tolerate too? Do you feel comfortable going outside, taking a walk? Some of my clients will go sit even by themselves in a dog park, to kind of at least have some good energy around them, but still being able to isolate. I think a park just a regular park would be good for that, because I was in that weird kind of bind of I wanted people kind of close by, but not really talking to me. When I did feel, not that scared, I would walk outside and try to, I think if people can do any grounding, getting your socks off and your feet on the ground, that's not going to help with akathisia per se, but, just anything like that to get us connected back to, the rhythms of the day. I think that's another important thing that got really kind of out of whack for me, was that I felt progressively, not every day, but a lot of days, the symptoms would slowly kind of get a smidge more manageable by the evening. So I became a night owl. But I think it's really important, to the best of our ability, to get in the rhythms of going to bed when it's dark and waking up when it's light. Grounding as best we can, eating as clean as we can, drinking as much water as we can. I think that's another thing I didn't do well enough when I was going through it, was drink enough water. I should have been drinking tons of water, especially with the amount of walking and pacing I was doing. I think it's, again, there are lots of online games you can do, solitaire, because again, with solitaire, if you're a little frantic, you can move your fingers and, you can be doing stuff like that. There's some online games, do stuff like that. For some of my clients that have really improved some, we even look at things like neurofeedback and things like that they can do on their own at home, different games and things like that to kind of do brain training. But I'd say that's much further along in most people's healing. But I think anything to keep the mind active in a way. For some people that the anhedonia gets so severe, the lethargy gets so severe, that while I think it's important to honor that feeling, it's also important, to the best of your ability, to move a little bit. Movement is so powerfully healing to the human body and human mind and human nervous system. But again, working within the parameters of whatever your system's capable of at that time, not pushing ourselves too hard. Clearly, we never want to push ourselves in a way that's going to stir up symptoms. But I think, that's the hardest thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, another thing that a lot of my people say is, like you, they want to be around people, but they actually, some of them don't. The last thing they would want is to engage with them. And so they get afraid of going to supermarkets. And,
right.
When they go out walking, it's with sunglasses on, a hat and a hoodie, and it's kind of like staring at the ground. It's like, I want to be out here moving around and kind of around people, but dear God, I hope no one talks to me, because that would, be terrifying.
Yeah, it's hard, because again, I think it's that weird balance between we want some connection and we don't want to be disturbed. And, I mean, when I was living with a good friend of mine for a couple months, I would say to him, just sit like 10 feet away from me. Don't go to bed yet, but you don't have to talk to me. Just sit there, and that was comforting for me. But again, I think it's that's the $64,000 question, is how to distract when you can't. How do you get through things when it feels unbearable? And I think some of it's just also being as loving and compassionate to yourselves and giving yourself credit for the minute you made it through, or the 5 minutes you made it through, the 10 minutes or the hour or the 10 hours of the day. Every day you make it through is an accomplishment. It's a huge accomplishment. And giving yourself credit for anything that you're enduring, I kind of jokingly will do this to myself. I'll feel the physicality of patting myself on the back and telling myself I did a good job for something. And, we all deserve that for the fight that we're fighting when we're fighting for our lives, like many people are in this.
Yeah. Okay. So, Chris, I think that's about it for today. I'm kind of done with my questions, and I think that was a really good overview. Have we missed anything that you had that you wanted to discuss before we wrap?
I don't think so. I think, again, just arm yourself as much as you can for the knowledge that you think applies to your situation. But I hope some of the general information I've given at least helps guide that process for you.
Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.